Russian President Vladimir Putin has said that he looks forward to deepening the partnership between Russia and China in a meeting with Beijing's top diplomat. Wang Yi attended talks with Putin at the Kremlin today and told him that relations between Beijing and Moscow would not be influenced by other countries. The meeting took place just days out from the one-year anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Putin also says that he's looking forward to a visit to Moscow by Chinese President Xi Jinping. Well, for more on all this, we want to pull in now Teresa Fallon. She is the founder and director of the Center for Russia, Europe, Asia Studies. She joins me from Brussels. It's good to see you again. Let me ask you about Wang Yi. He told Putin today that crises offer opportunities. What opportunities do you think the war in Ukraine can offer to both Russia and China?
Well, I think it's becoming quite clear that both Russia and China have strategic alignment. Their interests coincide, and they are challenging the international order. So I think that the Chinese character of where there is crisis, there is opportunity. Even though this war has taken much longer than either Putin or Xi Jinping ever envisioned, they are trying to see how they can make their kind of dream of global governance and changing international order work, even though Putin appears very, very weak at this point.
China is apparently the stronger of the two. It says that it's worried about the conflict escalating, and there's speculation that Xi Jinping will present a peace plan for Ukraine later this week. Is China, is it a credible mediator?
Well, that's a really good question. We saw very early on in this conflict, before even the conflict, 1 year ago at the Munich Security Conference, U.S. intelligence and officials were passing out information that Ukraine to be invaded by Russia. And there was such a positive bias that no one would believe what was happening. They didn't accept this intelligence. They couldn't comprehend that Russia would actually invade Ukraine. So the U.S. had approached Chinese officials, shared this intelligence with them, and asked them to use their influence with the Kremlin to try to prevent this war. And Beijing, what they did was they took this intelligence, gave it to the Russians, and they didn't really influence them to stop the war. So I think that just that act alone might put China in the question mark. But in addition to that, High Representative Joseph Borrell of the EU called in March in the early days of the war that only China could be the mediator, which I think struck many people as rather odd. And Beijing never said yes, they never said no. But we know throughout this entire conflict, President Zelensky has said Beijing has never accepted any of his phone calls. And we only saw very recently at the Munich Security Conference a photo op with Kuleba speaking Wang Yi. So I think the fact that Beijing's position is that we are neutral, but we lean towards Russia is kind of an obfuscation of the facts that they are supporting Russia by buying oil, selling them high tech that other countries won't sell them. So they are really aiding Moscow.
Yeah, last week at the Munich Security Conference, we heard from the United States that there is worry, there are indications that China may be providing lethal aid to Russia that can be used in Ukraine. And immediately from the foreign ministry in Beijing, there was this protest. It was a very loud protest, which, makes you wonder, well, maybe there was some truth to this. What could be the calculus for China to take that risk and to give weapons to Russia, knowing they will be used in eastern Ukraine?
Well, there's a lot of talking out of both sides of the mouth. Let's remember that we saw Li Jiangshi. He traveled to the Duma back in September. The Russians released the video, so it was hard to kind of refute. And he said he's the highest-ranking Chinese Communist Party official who was speaking in Moscow, saying that we will help you China will help you undermine Western sanctions. Now, they said that in September. We know that Beijing has been selling a lot of dual-use goods to Russia, and that this is really helping the war effort go on. It's undermining Western sanctions. So I think that the idea, I mean, it's a brilliant strategy. It's fake diplomacy as far as I can see, that Beijing has, I call them the reverse armchair Kissingers. There's some scholars in Europe who think that they can somehow drive a wedge between China and Russia, and by trying to kind of China in as a mediator, as a possible mediator. But I think that this is really misplaced. And I think that China and Russia clearly are aligned and they have strategic interests. So they are cooperating with each other. And it's in Beijing's interest. It's nice to have a weak Russia, but they don't want too weak of a Russia, because it's better to have Putin as a useful vassal than have some maybe new reformer come in if Putin is taken out, and have someone who might be more friendly towards transatlantic relations or to the West. So I think Beijing is maybe even more concerned that Putin is so weak that maybe they need to help him because they don't want to see him leave power.
Well, let me ask you.
It will undermine their interests.
Before we run out of time, this balancing act that China is trying to master right now, I mean, their economy, completely interdependent with the United States, they can't alienate the U.S. completely. At the same time, they're trying to have their cake and eat it too when it comes to Russia. Do you see them being able to perfect this balancing act?
Well, it's a very complicated diplomatic tap dance as far as I'm concerned. They need, especially Europe, because the U.S. has a lot of sanctions against exporting high tech to China. So they need to kind of claw back influence in Europe, have a charm offensive, make the Europeans think that they're on their side. And that's why they're trying to sell the idea of being a mediator, because they need to buy high tech from Europe, the high tech that the U.S. won't sell them. In addition to that, they need access to European markets, and they want foreign direct investment from Europeans. And there's also the issue of captured elites. We see in Europe, certain industries, like perhaps the car industry, will benefit by having investments go to China. We saw immediately after I have concerns. We understand China has concerns at its SCO meeting. Chancellor Scholz got on a plane, brought leaders of German industry with him to Beijing to make deals. Okay. So I think that there are a lot of moving pieces to all of this. And let's remember, Russia is a storm, but China is really climate change, as one Wang put it.
Yeah, that's a very good way to put it. Teresa Fallon with the Center for Russia, Europe, Asia Studies. We appreciate your time and your insights tonight. Thank you.